Este programa tem apoio cultural da CNM, Confederação Nacional dos Metalúrgicos.
Olá, está começando o Entrevistas aqui no Café do Sindicato dos Bancários no centro de São Paulo. Hoje o meu convidado é o ator e ativista sindical norte-americano Danny Glover.
Ator, produtor, Danny Glover tem sido uma presença importante no cinema, no palco e na televisão há mais de 25 anos. Nasceu em São Francisco, Califórnia, em 1946. Participou de quase 20 filmes e é conhecido por suas atuações em obras de ação, como Predador 2 e a série Máquina Mortífera. Glover ganhou vários prêmios no cinema, no teatro e na televisão. O ator foi um dos fundadores da Louverture Films, que se dedica à produção de obras com relevância histórica, finalidade social, valor comercial e integridade artística. Danny Glover também ganhou respeito pelo seu ativismo comunitário e esforços filantrópicos em países da África, América Latina e Caribe. Também atua como embaixador da UNICEF.
Bem-vindo, Danny Glover. É um prazer e uma honra recebê-lo aqui. Vão participar também desta entrevista as nossas convidadas, a jornalista Semaia Oliveira, do Coletivo das Mulheres da Periferia, e a dirigente sindical Rita Berloffa, diretora executiva do Sindicato dos Bancários e Financiários de São Paulo, Osasco e região. Além da TVT, o Entrevistas está sendo exibido na TV Bahia, na Rede Minas e na TV Universidade Federal de Goiás. O programa também pode ser visto, como você sabe, no nosso canal do YouTube e também no Facebook. Mr. Glover, o senhor tem vindo com alguma frequência ao Brasil. Eu lhe pergunto, a cada vez que o senhor vem, o senhor acha que o Brasil progrediu ou regrediu?
Well, one of the first reasons I come to Brazil is that my wife is Brazilian. And so that provides me an opportunity to understand more about this country, this great country. I've come here in the service of organized labor, with auto workers in Canton, Mississippi, who were supported and had solidarity from CUT and other organizations here in Brazil. I've also come here for the first time at the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre. And I think there's an extraordinary discourse that's happening in Brazil, as there are discourses that are happening around the world, which reference what our relationship to each other within our nation states and our global relationship to each other. Those are important discussions. I hear more of that, the kind of internationalism and globalization that I just spoke of, outside of the country, whether that's been in Venezuela or whether that's been in Africa, or whether that's been here in Brazil and other places around the world. So Brazil provides an opportunity to see what ordinary citizens are doing, how they mobilize, how they grow, how they determine what are the projects that are necessary in order to advance democracy in the country itself.
É mais difícil ser progressista nos Estados Unidos da América do Norte ou no Brasil?
I think, since I see myself as a global citizen, wherever I am, I think is a place where I find it imperative that these voices be elevated or in certain ways, that we hear the voices of ordinary people. So I don't find it any easier. I'm not saying that the the dialogue does not differentiate from country to country, because each country and what happens in those respective country have different dynamics, different historical dynamics, and the political moment at that time suggests certain things. I campaigned for Bernie Sanders for president. There was a political moment where it mobilized young people, which unexpectedly, young people and people who had been disenfranchised with the usual candidates from the Republican and the Democratic Party. So there was an excitement about that. You know, how does that mobilization of these citizens translate into a new narrative about how we deal with the problems within the country itself, the national problems, and I would hope so also those with respect to foreign policy as well. So each moment presents us that opportunity. Brazil, when I followed Brazilian politics, even before I met my wife more than 15 years ago. So the idea of what was happening in the rest of the world has always been consistent and constituted a great deal of my approach to politics, social development, and human development.
Dani, é um prazer estar aqui com você. Eu gostaria de te perguntar, considerando essa atual conjuntura política que a gente está enfrentando no Brasil, e que a população negra, que é a maioria aqui, mas está tão longe do poder, como que você relaciona essa onda de retrocessos e também a condenação do então presidente Lula com o racismo?
Well, certainly the election of Lula as president brought extraordinary expectation and hope for the country itself, and particularly of the people of African descent. And certainly there were advances that were made, certainly. It so happened that my wife, who was a professor of education, was a part of that. The education took a step forward in a different way in acknowledging and recognizing the needs of African descendants. Also, what happened in terms of the Colombo people, and also what is happening with the distribution of land, how that in itself now has brought another kind of reacculturation to an empowerment to people at all. Labor, organized labor, COOT, and other organizations played a major role in all these elements that were changing. So we look at Lula as the personality, but it happens from the ground up. It's people demanding the kind of change that I thought was apparent and certainly we felt was going to be institutionalized. But things just don't come institutionalized because we wish it. We had to have some sort of sustainable activism, and that has happened, certainly is, at the time, even despite what is happening in the political climate right now. As sustainable activism is important and essential to democracy itself, to building an inclusive democracy. And so as I look at that moment, whether it's the issue with women, we just had yesterday's Women's Day and the Women's March yesterday, with the issue of women, it frames the kind of way in which we continue the struggle, the discourse, and the action that we need to take as public, in the public space as well.
Rita.
Bom, Dani, é um prazer enorme tê-lo aqui conosco. E eu queria lhe perguntar alguma coisa sobre seu lado ativista. Você, como cidadão do mundo e totalmente comprometido com a luta dos movimentos civis, sindicais, seguramente você sabe deste avanço das forças conservadoras no mundo, de um ataque à democracia, aos movimentos dos trabalhadores. Eu lhe perguntaria como que você vê o papel do sindicato como enfrentamento a esse movimento, e principalmente considerando a baixa densidade sindical nos Estados Unidos, como que você vê, como deveríamos agir para esse enfrentamento, enfim, como que você observa esse movimento?
Well, it's an extraordinary question, and it's important to understand the use of trade unions and the level of internationalism that we experience at various points in time in the 20th century. literally, by the end of World War II, almost 40% of the American workforce in the private sector and to what extent in the public sector were unionized. There was a purge at that particular point in time, destabilizing unions and disempowering workers at the time, and that's been ongoing for some time. It didn't happen just overnight. So the internationalism that we once saw, the way in which workers from around the world were able to find some sort of common ground in which the discussion has changed because the platform has changed. Capital has become global. We're not going to argue about that. That's real, that's fact in every sense. At the end of World War II, about 75% of the wealth was owned by, in the world, was owned by the United States. Right now, 75% of the wealth is owned by corporations. So what impact has that had on labor? What impact has that had on immigration and migration? All those are real questions. You know, we often are mesmerized by the extraordinary achievements and the ability to consume and materialism that happens in the world that we see now. Our access to these material things, but it covers the real fact of what is happening with workers around the world. Poor people have become poor. Rich has gone, the rich have become richer. So the wealth is matriculating to the top, not democratized among those people who are the working class as well. So not only is it important for us to understand what is the global nature of that, it's certainly, if capital has the capacity to move wherever it wants, then what is the relationship that workers have to this fluctuation that happens in and out of this country? In and out of respective country, and to recognize that that is not simply the responsibility of one country. It's responsibility of organized labor and its own sense of internationalism, its own sense of making labor and the relationships, whether you're in Australia, or whether you're in Germany, or whether you're in Brazil, or whether you're in the United States, making this a common battle.
O senhor participou da eleição de Barack Obama, que para o mundo inteiro significou um momento de extrema esperança pelo ineditismo de os Estados Unidos elegerem um presidente negro. Que balanço o senhor faz hoje do que foi o governo Barack Obama? Nesses termos, para o avanço da questão da igualdade racial na América do Norte?
That's a very difficult question. Certainly, Obama, because he is a black man, a man of African descent who assumes the most powerful position in the world, is going to receive enormous pressure and attacks from those just on the racial makeup, because he's black. So there's one element of that which is clear under that. You know, the question is that in spite of that, our questions of what kind of moves that would we expect from within the construct of electoral process, what kind of moves and things would we expect from a black president? You know, certainly we saw what happened from the beginning. And this is not to say to criticize Obama, but the reality is the reality. We ended with what was referred to as the Great Recession. The Great Recession affected more people in the world and in particularly the United States since the World Depression of 1929. So here we have right now, we have those people who were affected. It's obvious that the perpetrators of this Great Recession were the large monopoly, multinational corporations, banking institutions, et cetera, et cetera. Who gets bailed out? Who do the trillions of dollars go to? They don't go to the people who are most vulnerable and most impacted by this Great Recession: women, single women, women of color, poor people, working people, and all that. It goes to the people who are at the top. All right, they're the ones bail out under the guise of it's too big to fail. It's the slogan. They were too big to fail, and yet they had failed us and failed the public. Now, I don't know if there was any other choice. You know, I don't know how we could have appeased, understood, or taken in consideration the millions of men and women, families who lost so much wealth, accumulated wealth during that particular point in time. Working people at the same time. At the same time, Obama had an opportunity to really give a voice to organized labor. Organized labor supported him in the United States. SEIU, United Auto Workers, all the major unions in the United States supported Obama's election. And yet, I don't think they got anything as a result of the support they gave him. So there are many things that we can talk about in terms of what happened. What are the dynamics? It's clear for us to understand what are the political, historic, and social dynamics that have occurred to bring this about. And why would we expect so much from this particular one person in a presidential office space of only 8 years? So all these particular things are happening. How did movements that brought him to power now, in terms of the electoral process, how do they pressure him and push him to a point where he himself has to recognize that he has a responsibility as well? Did those things happen? I think time was told, as time is suggesting that they didn't happen in the way in which they should have. Did we find ourselves disillusioned by the simple election of a black president? Maybe that's the case, you know. So the question becomes the system itself, whether we see what is happening in the system. We see what is happening during his administration. What had happened in Standing Rock, when First Nation people, the real stewards of the earth, the real stewards of water, clean water, were in this sense fighting and standing up standing up to not simply U.S. capital, but global capital as well. How did that event affect what is happening in other places in the world? How does it affect what happened in Brazil? I went to Minas Gerais last year, a year and a half ago, and we witnessed the dam, after the dam had broken there, the impact that it had on those particular communities, most of them of indigenous and African descent as well.
Mas, claro, impossível, depois de um rápido intervalo, eu vou querer que a Rita, que é especialista nesta área, trate com Danny Glover da questão exatamente do poder do capital financeiro pelo mundo afora. E às vezes não há Barack Obama que dê conta disso. Nós já voltaremos.
Cartão de crédito, carnês, empréstimos, financiamento de veículos. São serviços oferecidos para a população por instituições financeiras e pelo comércio. Tudo para facilitar a vida do consumidor. Mas em muitos casos, o barato sai caro e vira uma armadilha daquelas que lançam a pessoa no buraco sem fundo do endividamento. Saiba como não ter dívidas, adotar uma nova postura de consumo e evitar cair nas tentações do mercado. O endividamento é o tema do Bom para Todos dessa quarta, às 8h30 da noite.
O patrimônio cultural mineiro visto por especialistas.
O aleijadinho, de fato, era pardo.
As particularidades regionais, bens materiais e imateriais, sejam celebrações, formas de expressão, saberes e lugares, como também edificações, monumentos e objetos tradicionalmente reconhecidos, são um convite para o conhecimento. Bem Cultural, hoje, 10h30 da noite. Bem Cultural, aqui na TVT.
Nós voltamos ao Café do Sindicato dos Bancários, no centro de São Paulo, com o nosso entrevistado de hoje, o norte-americano Danny Glover, ator, ativista sindical. Trouxe tanta gente aqui para o bar do sindicato para vê-lo, que você percebeu no primeiro bloco, que até um telefone celular tocou impertinentemente, mas não atrapalhou o entendimento do que disse o nosso Danny Glover. Antes, aliás, da Rita tocar nesse tema, que é um tema para mim particularmente sensível, do poderio que o capital financeiro tem hoje sobre todos os presidentes, inclusive o dos Estados Unidos, Dani, eu tenho uma curiosidade pessoalíssima. Você é casado com uma brasileira. Não aprendeu a falar nem um pouquinho de português?
I'm in the process. I'm learning slowly.
Ah, é? Bem devagarzinho.
I have one of those old brains. So I'm in the process.
Okay.
As my wife always saying, she's keeping hope alive.
Ela é uma brilhante educadora.
I know. Look, I know the things I need to know. Bom dia, minha esposa bonita.
Bom dia.
You say that, kill it.
Fantastic.
It's all right. You know, cala a boca, marido. Those are essential to understand.
Bom dia, mulher bonita. That's enough. Rita, faz favor.
Bom, voltando, é verdade o que disse anteriormente o Juca, que o poderio do setor financeiro no mundo. Nós sabemos que as grandes empresas transnacionais, notadamente os bancos, elas têm capturado os governos dos países, capturado suas economias, por vezes suas reservas naturais, e têm dado a linha da política nos diversos países. Aqui no Brasil não foi diferente. Os bancos foram os grandes patrocinadores do golpe. Mas eu queria, por exemplo, o estudo da Oxfam, só para fazer um link, diz que 8 homens no mundo detêm 50% da riqueza, detêm a riqueza de 50% da população mundial. E a gente observa o empobrecimento muito grande, ou seja, cada vez maior a concentração de riqueza. Mesmo nos Estados Unidos, uma economia poderosa, me assusta cada vez que eu vou lá e vejo a quantidade de moradores de rua, coisa que não se via, por exemplo, em Washington. Em São Francisco, recentemente eu estive, também fiquei extremamente impressionada, muitos moradores de rua. Eu lhe pergunto, você avaliaria, considerando isso tudo, que o capitalismo não deu certo?
Well, let's look at this. And San Francisco, it pains me. It pains my heart.
Sim.
I'm born in San Francisco. I've lived there virtually all my life. And not only have I lived there all my life, I've lived in the same community and neighborhood my entire life, since I was 11 years old. So it hurts me in a sense. But we have to understand the nature of this, what we call this system of capitalism. And frankly, we're able to talk about it now. We're able to say what it has done and what it has not done, and how it accumulated wealth for the rich and particularly personal wealth, but also global wealth for nation states. Since the first engine for the Industrial Revolution was slavery and cotton. Went out there. Who were the ones who picked slavery and cotton? Who worked those fields and everything? It did something by 1800 the world had never seen before in the accumulation of wealth, of producing a mass production, all those things happening with that. What did that mean? And by the way, I'll be in Venezuela where President Maduro was commemorating the end of slavery on the 24th of March. But in the sense, it's critical to understand the nature of the world and the accumulation of capital from that moment on. The second engine may be said that fossil fuel and technology became the second engine which drove this thing. But what has happened in that process? We could say that for various reasons that the system of capitalism moved the world along on a particular pace. But it became, as Karl Marx and other things, it became a system which was not only has exploited particularly human beings, it exploited nature itself and Mother Earth itself. So we have to think about that now as we face not only the extraordinary reality that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and not only that we're facing, whether who deny us or expressing it or not, we're facing global warming and climate change. That's real. Just go down to the South Pole or the North Pole and you understand that reality. And all that's that. At the same time, the system itself is accumulating more and more of the public space. That's the public, the commons, as most of us call it. They're clean, those places where water becomes not simply a need and an entitlement, it becomes a privilege. Clean water becomes a privilege. All these are the dominations brought on by the system itself at this particular stage, you know. Have there been moments in which the system was able to transform itself or hear the voices of common human beings and the needs of human beings? Yeah. And that was because of the extraordinary radicalism that took place around the world within the 20th century. Within the 20th century, the first part of the 20th century, organized labor, unions, working people, people who were left out of the equation, colonies, former colonies that became independent and everything, had the possibility of changing the nature of this, what was happening in this system itself. But the system continued to crush all those movements for change, beginning in the United States, beginning in other places, in other places of the world, the brutally crushed resistance to what was happening, resistance to the change was happening. So here we find ourselves now at this advanced stage. And the reality of it, and like I said, we can talk about capitalism now. You know, we sometimes during our progressive evolution, everything else, we felt it dangerous to talk about or even question the system of capitalism. What did Margaret Thatcher say? There's no other way. No other way. And look what has happened in the world since she said there's no other way. But we have to understand the trajectory of that, and understanding that allows us to build the sustainable movements for life itself. And they happen right in our own community in various ways. And I gave MST, but MST reminds me of what is happening in little communities about urban gardening in the United States, Detroit or Chicago, where people are reclaiming their communities that have been devastated, and we can find that, but ordinary people are doing the work. We can't expect global capitalism to do that work. We have to do that work.
Eu gostaria de que você falasse um pouquinho sobre o documentário que você foi um dos produtores, Strong Island, que acabou de ser indicado ao Oscar. E esse documentário fala da questão da violência contra as pessoas negras, contra os corpos negros e o genocídio de uma maneira muito particular, porque tem uma perspectiva familiar aí, de como a morte de uma pessoa negra que não foi levada em conta em termos legais, que não foi analisada como deveria, torna um impacto muito grande em toda uma família negra, né? Como essa família é dilacerada. A gente vive isso muito fortemente no Brasil. Então, os jovens negros, as mulheres negras são as pessoas que mais morrem aqui nesse país. E a gente tem, recentemente, o que a gente pode dizer de mais destaque, a intervenção militar federal que a gente está vivendo no Rio de Janeiro, e como os corpos negros são constantemente autorizados a serem mortos, né? São mortes concedidas, autorizadas. Então, gostaria que você falasse um pouquinho da importância da gente trazer a discussão de políticas de drogas para o centro do nosso debate, quando a gente pensa em construir uma real democracia.
Well, the test for democracy, wherever it is, wherever it pretends to be, the test for real democracy, and I'm looking about the system of democracy in itself, the theory and ideas around it, you know, democratic, the democracy, people, ordinary people, being the stewards of the system of change, and voices being able to be heard within that context. So certainly when we talk about black bodies, and as you noted, the film that my company produced, which was nominated for an Oscar documentary called Strong Island. And the importance of that is to understand the physical, historic nature of this journey for African descendants. You know, whether it's here, Brazil, wherever it is in the Americas, whatever it is. Here's a family that had moved from the segregated South, and in a sense, because of the injustice in the segregated South, finds that same injustice and the sense of denial of their humanity right there in the North, the promised land in a sense. And so here they are caught, and it certainly destroys the whole family when they did everything possible in terms of merging their past, the pain of the past, overcoming the pain of the past, working to overcome the pain of their own historic past, and using that as a platform to build another future. And certainly they worked hard. They provided the best they could for their children and everything else. And so simply what happens is, in the sense that their life didn't matter. You know, that the judicial system saw that their life, in his life, in this sense, the son itself, he felt that he was expendable in some sense. So the justice that they had longed for was never realized, hadn't been realized in this particular process. I'm sure that happens in countless places. Every day, 7 young black Brazilian kids on the average die here in this country. Every day. That's real. It's the most grievous exploitation of human life in the world, perhaps, particularly a country that's not in conflict. And certainly, it pales in, you know, I mean, it doesn't, you know, what happens in the United States pales in comparison with what happens here. We have to understand that in a country that has not 20% of its population of African descent, but 50% of its population of African descent and everything. So all those are things important for us to understand. What does it mean to be here? Du Bois is so brilliant. I read Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, the great intellectual and great thinker of the first part of the 20th century, who said the question of the 20th century is going to be the question of color, the color line. He said that in 1900. At the same time, he talked about the veil, being black. He talked about the double consciousness of being black in a white world, having to be black and having to respond to the world, the world that exists, that determines who he is, not only who he is, but who he can be as well. So all these particular things are questions that I think that are important to understand. The central issue of democracy in the world, in this country, in the hemisphere, is the central issue that is race, period. It has been from the first time that 10 million slaves come here to Brazil, or it had been from the first time when the slave economy built the most wealthiest country, created wealth in my country. It has been, and it continues to be. The United States, more than 100 years after the abolition of slavery, we're still talking about the issue of race. But we'll not stop. No matter what the ideologies are, if we can't centralize that around race, and that we've missed the point.
Fantástico. Tão claro. Aliás, o nosso Gessé Souza diz a mesma coisa, não é de hoje, né? Quando a gente pensa no Brasil, 350 anos de escravidão, que até hoje embotam a nossa cabeça. Nós vamos fazer um rápido intervalo e já voltamos com Danny Glover.
O Olhar TVT dessa sexta-feira traz o talento e as histórias da dupla de intérpretes de música de raiz, Pedro Paulo e Dito Costa. Os dois metalúrgicos aposentados testemunharam os momentos mais importantes da luta sindical do ABC e no programa relembram com muita sensibilidade clássicos da música caipira.
Tem franguinho na panela.
O Olhar TVT é nesta sexta-feira, 8h30 da noite, aqui na TVT. Vida no Sul, um programa que apresenta a cultura, valoriza a ação comunitária, a agricultura ecológica, a solidariedade e a participação popular na construção de uma vida melhor.
Do coração são
dezenas de artistas, diversos assuntos e histórias de inúmeros municípios. Um universo multicultural com as particularidades da região sul do Brasil. Vida no Sul, sábado, 6h30 da manhã, aqui na TVT.
Estamos de volta ao Café do Sindicato dos Bancários no centro de São Paulo com o programa Entrevistas. Hoje entrevistando o ator e ativista sindical norte-americano Danny Glover. Mr. Danny, o fato de o senhor ser o ativista que o senhor é, de alguma maneira dificulta a sua vida profissional ou o senhor é convidado para os filmes sem que se leve em conta as suas posições políticas?
It's a place where I think that I don't really think about the positions that I take vis-a-vis whether I'm going to work or whatever. So to what degree it impacts my life or whatever it is, I don't pay attention to that. I understand that as an actor, you begin at one stage as a young actor and you matriculate through the process and then you ended up becoming an old actor. And I am in that latter part and stage of being an old actor. So that so many things taken into consideration. What I'm more concerned is what do we determine to be cultural production? And how does the work that we do influence, move people, validate who they are, validate their lives, and their possibility as citizens? That's what I'm concerned. If that gets done by a young actor, if that gets done by me, if it gets done by women, men who are in the business, not only in my country, but other places in the world too, because I'm a big fan of foreign film. Ever since I was about 17 years old, I looked at foreign film. They told me something about what was the other world that I looked at, and what was the other world that I lived in. Not just, you know, constricted to my own limited sense of the world, but when I began to see the ideas of other people, the way in which they express culture, and finding some sort of affinity with them and connection with them. And that was the beautiful thing about being an artist himself. And the other point in time is that I've been in the UN family, and I say the UN family, the United Nations Development Program, and most recently for the last 14 years with UNICEF. And then I go to projects. I see projects that people are doing. I don't care if it's Uruguay, right in the streets there at the capital, or I don't care if it's Sao Paulo. I don't care if it's coming down the Amazon River in Peru, or whether it's in Colombia and talking to Afro-descendants in Cali, which is primarily a city of African descendants, or Cartagena, or Bogota, and talk about the issue of violence, and talk about the issue of women and all that prostitution, the issue of young prostitutes in Cartagena. Those are the kind of worlds in which, those are the kind of ways in which I integrate myself, my story, with the stories that I see, underlining the word stories. So I don't know, in the sense, I live a very simple life. You know, I live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. You know, people who see me know me for 40, 50 years and everything. So the bottom line is not to think about that, even though I know there's some impact on that, but that's not where I'm going. When I became an artist, an actor in a sense, the simple reason was that I thought I could be of some service. I thought I could be of some use, underlining the word use, wherever it was, whatever the plays we did, and whatever the work we did at that very early stage in that. I believed it as that acting, that art was a translation of the human dynamic itself, in which people see themselves, smile at themselves, celebrate themselves, and get mad at themselves. All the emotions go into that. So all of those things were things that drew me to it initially. And then when I found a way that I could use that as a platform, it came at a moment in time during the anti-apartheid movement. So I began to do plays about South Africa and everything else, and it's an American audience and everything. So what I'm saying, that's the framework. How do we use that, and how do we build that is what's important for me right here. My career is what it is. It has been what it is. I've been enormously fortunate to do films that people recognize me from around the world.
De acordo, mas ainda insisto, em tempos de Trump, o senhor diria que, por exemplo, não há o menor risco de uma volta aos tempos do macartismo nos Estados Unidos?
Well, I think this is an important time for us, you know, not only because we see this backlash that we happen from the right, you know, and this kind of, this really far-right elements in it. It's an important time because people are speaking out on every level, whether it's women in the industry itself, with its women period, of speaking out. And that gives us a framework to politicize ourselves in a different kind of way, and understanding that we have to go beyond the kind of liberal connotations of what we mean by democracy. We have to reclaim our history, and our history has been one of anything that's changed has come through radical, progressive movements by ordinary people. So Sidney Poitier, the first black actor, was able to stand in front of a camera and people recognized that this was a different world. His image brought the idea of a different world. People celebrated Sidney Poitier around the world, in the sense that there are women who are standing up behind the camera, in front of the camera, and making other suggestions and making demands on what is happening at this particular point in time. That's what's important at this moment, you know? So in the time of Trump and who he is, and I'm not gonna go into, we could spend a whole afternoon talking about who he is and everything else. In the time of that, it is it's important that we continue vigilantly to attack the ideas that he promotes, and also to build the world that we want to resemble who we really are.
O que você está dizendo agora vem muito de encontro que eu gostaria de perguntar, que é exatamente esse momento que a gente vive no Brasil. Embora a gente tenha esse avanço, essa onda de retrocesso do fascismo que a gente está vivendo aqui, ao mesmo tempo, o mínimo de políticas públicas que a gente teve nos últimos anos com o governo do PT permitiu que eu estivesse aqui, por exemplo, porque eu fui uma jornalista, estudante do ProUni, e eu consegui me apropriar desses recursos que a internet tem possibilitado para transformar em algum projeto, algo que compartilhe informação de onde eu vim, né, da periferia, do meu bairro, Jardim Miriam, do lugar onde eu venho, e por essa perspectiva. Então, eu acho muito importante a gente pensar na perspectiva dos produtores de conhecimento, de cinema, os roteiristas, a importância dos profissionais negros nessa construção, do quanto isso é potente. A gente tem vivido isso no Brasil. E, embora a gente tenha vivido essa onda, ao mesmo tempo, o mínimo de acesso que a gente teve, que é um dos motivos pelos quais, um dos motivos pelo qual a grande elite no Brasil está enlouquecendo, né? O mínimo de pessoas negras que tiveram acesso à educação conseguiram fazer uma grande transformação social nas suas próprias comunidades. E no cinema, eu gostaria que você comentasse um pouco os últimos filmes que a gente teve, que acho que a gente teve um upgrade aí de narrativas, como Moonlight, Strong Island, que é o filme que você ajudou na produção. Qual é a importância da gente trazer essas novas narrativas? E qual é a importância da gente apoiar produtores, criadores, cineastas negros? No Brasil, esse apoio ele é praticamente nulo. O dinheiro aqui ele vai principalmente para produtoras, grandes cineastas, brancos majoritariamente, e toda a população negra que trabalha aqui com cinema, com audiovisual, com jornalismo, não recebe financiamento necessário para sobreviver. Então, qual é a importância, o poder dessas novas narrativas e qual a importância de financiar essas pessoas?
Well, that is a major, I mean, it's an important question. You know, the power of media, and the power of media and what it has, the control it has on our lives. You know. And how we find ways in which to overcome the obstacles placed within right in front of us. Like I said before, they're historical obstacles. They're obstacles that have been ingrained in the consciousness of a certain kind of exceptionalism that white people might have in terms of the experience, this experience that we talk about of African descendants. It is based within an untruth, and I would say using the kind word of untruth, of what our contributions have been. And I'm talking about Brazil itself. What the contributions of African descendants have been enormous. It's understanding that we have to understand that in terms and underlaying consistently the history of what these contributions have had, of community building. It's funny that the national dish of Brazil, feijoada, is a dish developed by the slaves, in a sense. That's the national dish. Isn't it amazing that we're able to take that moment, if we were able to realize that the extent of what that means and everything, and extrapolate on that, and figure out, well, what else is there that these people, these former slaves, these these slaves who were imported here, what else have they given to this society? What else they given to this world through slavery and beyond slavery? And what can they perceive to give as another way of extending the humanity necessary to build a world that works for all of us? All those are things that happen. And where do we begin that process in our cultural production? Ultimately, I would have thought, and what I thought, with the various changes that happened with the PET government that came in existence, and only for a short period of time, that we would be able to get a glimpse of what that could be in cultural production. There's some of the staple, what you call images, satirical images or comedic images or stereotypes of black people would have changed in some sense, you know, and would have evolved in some sense. Unfortunately, people are so culturally embedded in those images, the absolute, what they consider the absoluteness of those images, that it's hard to break through that. And we're thinking in the 21st century that we should have this plethora of different ideas, of different images, and different stories. But media controls what we see, how we think, and what we're capable of imagining. How we translate that and change that in the most insidious and when I say most progressive ways is the task that we have to do it here and have to do it in Brazil. And there's always that possibility, but it starts from the ground up. Believe me, it starts from the ground up. The images of Sidney Poitier, when I saw him as a child, were huge. I'd never seen anybody like that before as a child. Imagine what that instilled in me in terms of, I didn't want to be an actor, but the image itself, that it was transformative. But it came because people demanded the change. They demanded that change. They put forth the mothers and fathers who never spoke and never saw one movie, saw that movie with Sidney Poitier, and they were the ones who had claimed that their own ownership to that change. We have to claim ownership to that change, and we have to say to the rest of the Brazilian people that this is who we are, and continue to say that, and they acknowledge who we are, and they also become our allies in that. So whatever change we have to say, as I said, race is central to the whole issue of democracy of images, democracy within the workplace, democracy. Race is the main critical issue, the central part of that. So how do our allies, how do we build alliances for the changes that's necessary? It's a dialectic, it's a discourse. It's a struggle between contradictions, the contradictions that white people are embedded with in Brazil and the contradictions that are instilled here. It's understanding that, embracing that, having empathy for it, understanding, and ultimately respect.
Me permita pegar gancho em relação à mídia. Obviamente, nós entendemos o papel nefasto que a mídia pode ter numa sociedade. E aqui no Brasil isso ficou muito claro com o papel principalmente da Rede Globo como uma das grandes incentivadoras e apoiadoras desse golpe. E falando um pouco dessa mídia, por exemplo, tenta-se passar uma imagem dos Estados Unidos aqui no Brasil como ainda grande terra de oportunidades, um grande país, e não se mostram as mazelas vividas pelos trabalhadores. Não se fala, por exemplo, e eu insisto no tema sindicalista, porque é a minha praia, mas não se fala, por exemplo, que com a queda do sindicalismo norte-americano, houve um empobrecimento da classe média. Não se fala, por exemplo, que os trabalhadores bancários nos Estados Unidos não têm sindicato e que, pelo fato de não serem sindicalizados, eles recebem menos, olha o absurdo, do que os trabalhadores responsáveis pela limpeza onde está esse banco. porque os trabalhadores da limpeza são sindicalizados e os bancários não. Não se fala nada, por exemplo, da grande campanha que você participou na Nissan, para que os trabalhadores pudessem ter direito a uma voz. Enfim, a mídia mostra o lado maravilhoso das políticas neoliberais e não mostra a realidade vivida na sociedade norte-americana. O problema dos negros, o problema do enfrentamento às políticas raciais, que teve agora Black que a vida dos negros importa, enfim. E fazendo já um gancho com Obama nessa questão toda, quando você fala também que ele não atendeu muito a expectativa dos movimentos sociais, tem um amigo nosso, um grande ativista norte-americano, quem sabe você o conhece, o Steven Lerner, que ele diz que todo mundo fez a campanha do Obama, elegeu Obama e achou que os problemas todos estivessem resolvidos e foram para casa descansar. E não cobraram do Obama uma resposta, por exemplo, para mudar a legislação no que concerne a possibilidade dos trabalhadores se sindicalizarem. E daí, quando vem o Bernie Sanders, ele significava um refresco nessa política, uma novidade, porque fazia discussão do socialismo. Então, eu queria que você falasse um pouco desta realidade que vive hoje os Estados Unidos, para que o povo aqui do Brasil conheça um pouco, porque as grandes mídias não dão.
Eu só vou lhe pedir poder de concisão, porque nós temos mais 3 minutos para essa resposta derradeira.
I'm going to be precise as I can, because I participated in, first of all, a campaign in which, with auto workers in Canton, Mississippi, Nissan, which is an international company and everything. I participated in that campaign. I had alliances here. We had alliances to build solidarity alliances with CUT and with other unions here in Brazil, South Africa, France, and everything else. So we built this. They were mainly black workers in Mississippi, in a sense. And at some point in time, Obama could have said something about that. It was all during his tenure, and everything could have said something. He didn't say something about the right of workers in this sense. So I understand your question in a sense, and what we are expectation, but I think that movements happen, moments happen. Let's say moments. I don't want to say movement. Moments happen. How those moments translate into movement is what's critical. What's critical, not simply while during the election of Obama, but what happens after his election, and what do we do in the public space and everything to fight for the things? What do we do in pushing him? And maybe we didn't do enough to push him because we wanted to think that the issue of race had in some sense evaporated or disappeared, but it was still there. It's been the history of this country, the country. It's the history of this country too. The history of race is the history of this country, right here in Brazil. So I think the work that we have to do is certainly has to go beyond the personification of images, whether it's Lula or whether it's Obama. The work that we have to do has to be the kind of sustainable activism that pushes forth in the way that it has happened in other places. Like I said, any of these are possible. And what we do is possible only because we can make it possible. And as I said before, and I've said since I've been here, the first phrase that I learned in Portuguese happened more than almost 45 years ago when I learned this term, a luta continua.
É isso aí.
Muito bem. Eu diria, e você pode levar essa mensagem nossa à educadora Eliane Cavaleiro, que você aprendeu muito bem com ela. Entendeu? Você pode fazer mais este chamego, porque ela reagirá à altura. Eu não sei se a Semana tem mais alguma coisa a acrescentar, mas eu diria que estou aqui quase estupefato com a aula de humanismo, basicamente, que a gente pôde receber do Danny Glover. Mas claro que vou imputar a grande mulher que está atrás dele, que é a educadora brasileira Eliane Cavaleiro. Alguma coisa a acrescentar, Simaia?
Não, muito obrigada. É um prazer. Obrigada por deixar a gente aprender com você.
Muito obrigada e continue nos ajudando na luta dos trabalhadores pelo mundo. Muito obrigada.
A mim só resta uma última pergunta. Como eu, você torce para o Golden State Warriors, não?
I like the Golden State Warriors. You know, it's an extraordinary team. But I've been a fan of the Spurs, San Antonio Spurs.
San Antonio Spurs.
Because I like the Argentinian.
Okay.
You know me. And I used to like the French boy, Parker. And I like the idea of the internationalism. Tim Duncan, who comes from the American Virgin Islands, you know. So I'm called a traitor to some of my friends because I love the Warriors and love watching them and everything else. But I've been a Spurs fan for a long time. Okay.
É compreensível. Eu agradeço muito ao Danny Glover por aceitar participar do nosso programa. Agradeço também às nossas convidadas que abrilhantaram tanto esse bate-papo. A jornalista Simaia Oliveira, do coletivo Nós Mulheres da Periferia, e a Rita Berloffa, diretora executiva do Sindicato dos Bancários e Financiários de São Paulo, Osasco e região. Você sabe, além da TVT, o Entre Vistas está sendo exibido na TV Bahia, na Rede Minas e na TV Universidade Federal de Goiás. Não esqueça que esse programa também pode ser visto no nosso canal do YouTube e também pelo Facebook. E não esqueça também que o Entrevistas volta na semana que vem. E também não se esqueça, desesperar jamais. Até!
Este programa tem apoio cultural da CNM, Confederação Nacional dos Metalúrgicos,